Hi, I'm Kirk.
And I'm Ashley Gordon.
And this is episode 8.
8?
Of
That's my lucky number.
Reading for the Rest of Us. Remind us what this show is about?
Well, this one you made up.
Okay.
You say what it's about.
This one, we decided we're going to do something where we're not really recommending books. We're kind of talking about the history of how we came into possession of books that we normally wouldn't associate with.
Right. I called it on our Pinterest page, where you can go and see a list of all these books, Not Your Usual Suspects.
Not Your Usual Suspects. I have a question for you. I find every once in a while I sort of feel a little hemmed in by the type of books that I like, the type of books that I read for work. So every once in a while I like to bust out and just go crazy.
Just bust out.
Just bust
Yeah,
out
okay.
and pick something totally out of my...
I'm trying to imagine you busting out.
Whatever I would bust out of, I like to do that.
Okay.
And pick something totally off the wall. But you were telling me
I don't do that.
you don't really like that.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. In fact, when I get forced out of my reading comfort zone, it makes me kind of wiggy.
Really?
Yep. I
Why
like to
is
read
that?
the same kind of stuff over and over and over.
What makes you
I'm
uncomfortable?
obsessive compulsive.
Like, give us a type of book that makes you uncomfortable.
Well, this was such a weird topic.
Mm-hmm.
So you said, okay, pick out books that people normally wouldn't associate with you. So then you have to put yourself in the place of other people. Well, what do people normally associate? So I made my husband, we have an entire wall of bookshelves, and then they're books that they're just like dust bunnies at our house. They kind of accumulate. And so I made him stand in front of the bookshelf and point out books that are mine that people wouldn't assume are mine. And then I started asking friends, okay, what do I have here that you wouldn't think? So that part was weird.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, what doesn't look like me?
Right.
And then I thought, well, what is it? What books have I read that surprised me? And one I don't have with me today, but one that occurred to me on the way here was Her Fearful Symmetry.
Oh,
It's
yeah. Okay.
It takes place in Highgate Cemetery in London, of course, so that was pretty typical. I had just been to Highgate Cemetery, so I was looking for books about it. But it's all about a family and women, and forgive me, it's a little girly, and I don't typically read books by women or about women, and I know that's a horrible thing to admit, but I don't. So that book was had a lot of romance and ghosts and relationships, and I was surprised at how much I liked it.
Okay. Name me one of, if I were to come to your house, a book that I would think was your husband's but is actually yours.
Okay, and that brings up it's sort of an interesting point, because I'm, not surprisingly, the reader in the family, and I'm always looking for books that Jake and I might read together, my husband and I. My kids and I read together a lot, but I'm always looking for books. And he came to this union with a few books of his own, far fewer than I realized until we kind of cohabitated there and combined everything, which we didn't do until after we got married. So there are all these shelves that are my books, and then being the book snob that I am, even though this is Reading for the Rest of Us, and I'm really hoping that this show touches everybody who reads, I'm a total book snob, and so I segregate his books.
Oh.
So
okay.
all of his, I even brought one. There it is. There's a Stuart Woods book, and I tried to read it. I really did, but I have to put his Stuart Woods books over in a different shelf.
So you're not a thriller person.
I'm a thriller person. I'm not a sloppy writer thriller person.
Okay.
I know, that's terrible to say.
Well, that's
his
all
John
right.
Grisham books can touch mine.
Okay. All right.
I like those.
Well, let me tell you the story about, it's not the original book, but this is, I brought a book, science fiction book, which I don't think most people associate.
A Star Trek novel.
Normally associate me with. My wife loves science fiction. We have these conversations all the time about why don't you read science fiction? Well, the reality is I don't, because I don't have time. And I end up reading what I need to read for work, and what my pleasure tends to, blend in with my work. But this book here, this is not the original one that I had, but this was the first book I ever called my own. This was the first book.
In your whole life?
Well, now I had books when I was a kid, but this was the book the first one that I picked out when I was 7 years old.
And you still have it?
Well, this is not the original. I had to go find a copy.
That's so
cool.
cool.
The original is long gone. But I'll tell you the story of how I acquired this book.
You'll tell it if I stop talking.
Well, I was 7 years old and, you know, was bored and got on the bike and went down to the pharmacy and was hanging out.
Did you call it a pharmacy when you were 7?
In the book rack, no. We called it a drugstore.
Okay, me too.
But I stole it.
You stole it?
From the time
I've never stolen anything in my whole life.
From the time I was 7 until I was about 16, I was a book thief. And I would go into...
Oh my gosh, you talked about prostitutes on the last show, and now you're talking about stealing books. You are throwing me for a loop.
I would go into the drugstores and, you know, I'd just hoist a book. And of course, I thought I was quite the rebel, but the reality is, you know, I knew other kids that were getting busted for stealing M&Ms or things like that, but...
So you were stealing something that was worthy?
I was stealing paperbacks.
Do not try this at home.
No, do not.
People.
But I think it's an interesting experience because, you know, there is sort of an idea, books are often associated with thievery. I mean, it goes back to the idea of books being rarities that people who were not in the elite would steal in order to have possession of them. Stealing beneath the covers in order to read books that are sort of banned. So there are all these metaphors of thievery that is associated with books.
Okay, so have you donated a book to something like First Book or a charity to make up for all the books you
I donate books all the time. I give away books all the time.
Okay.
But so
Can you tell I didn't know this was coming?
I wonder if my sort of mental block against science fiction may be guilt. It may be I always associate that.
So now we've gone from
so now we can psychoanalyze me.
Spousal reading taste to my first book ever, which I thought was going to be some charming, lovely childhood story, which was stolen, which is now I can't read science fiction because I have this psychological block because I stole it. Wow, this is a heavy episode.
We are twisted people.
I just thought I was going to make fun of my husband's poor reading taste the whole time.
But I think it's you know, it's always lingered with me. And the funny thing is you know, this book, you know, the original of this book that I had disappeared. You know, I think
somebody stole it.
Well, I think when I moved out of the house after high school, I think, you know, of course, my parents boxed up everything and pitched it out the door. So it was probably donated to a church sale or something like that.
Good.
So
I feel better.
I had to go back and trust me, I made up for the purchase price, having to go find the original paperback with the cover and the first, you know, the first run and all of that. So, there's a story for you.
There is indeed.
But I was a big Star Trek fan for about 2 years, and then kind of grew out of that. So
and the guilt overwhelmed you.
It did, and I don't really read either Star Trek or science fiction much anymore. So that's one that's probably not associated with me. Show us another book that you brought. What's the L'Affaire? The Affair. Tell me about that one.
This is chick lit.
Okay.
It's total chick lit. I read Bridget Jones' Diary when it came out and absolutely howled with laughter, cried, heaving for breath. So I thought, well, maybe I can read chick lit because Bridget Jones' Diary is just well and truly chick lit. So I went through a phase, and the author of this, Diane Johnson, wrote a book called Le Divorce, and then this is L'Affaire. And so it is one of the few chick lit novels that I've held on to, and I did actually enjoy them. They're light and fluffy and fun and very girly, and most people don't associate me. Do
you have a lot of female friends that give you girly books?
No.
No. They know not to do that.
They know better.
They know better.
Yes.
They know how to avoid the wrath. So what makes this one a good example of this genre? What made you hold on to this one that you wouldn't have held on to?
Possibly, I think the first one was given to me by someone, so I associate it with the gift. Okay. And that was the other way I approached this. I started looking at the bookshelf and finding all of the books that people had given me, and I'm looking at it thinking, really? That was the other thing. Not only books that people wouldn't associate with me that I have read and liked, but books that people have given me that I thought, why would you ever think I would read this?
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun, too, to go back and see all the books I've been given, some of which, and this is an example of that, Beat the Reaper was one. This is Thomas Upchurch at Capital Book and News. Normally I get my recommendations from Eleanor and Cheryl, but this one came from Thomas. He was so excited about this book. I had to read it, and so I did. And it's incredibly violent, really grisly. There's body parts. It's a mob book, but it's also really funny.
Yeah.
So if you can do, I kind of skim the violence part, I have to be honest, or I kind of squint through those. But it's also very funny, and it's very medical, which I faint at the sight of blood. I mean, just like fall out.
So it's kind of forensic, CIS?
No, not that at all.
Oh, okay.
Not that at all. It's total mob overlapping with medical, a lot of blood.
All right.
But it's very funny. It's very fast-paced, and it was one of those books that somebody said, you absolutely have to read this. So you do, and I actually enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, I'll share with you another one, and I actually don't have a print copy of this one that I have on the old Magic Kindle at home, but I'm going to show a picture that it's famous for, and you tell me if you recognize it. You recognize that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Chic?
I'm sorry. That's a picture of my honeymoon. Sorry.
Oh my God, that was so bad.
I don't know if you can close in on that or not, go to that screen, but you remember the silent movie, The Chic, with Rudolph Valentino.
Okay, I had the wrong actor, but I did know The Chic.
Yeah, but I actually decided at one point about 3 or 4 years ago that that I needed to step outside my comfort zone and
wear eyeliner,
understand that too, but understand romance novels a little bit. And I figured I would go straight to the source. And interestingly enough, The Chic, which this is actually the first edition, the cover of it.
I feel faint just looking at it.
Went to it.
When was that published?
Well, it was published in 1920, and interestingly enough, this was the best-selling novel of not only 1920, but 1921. And what I love about this book...
It's the 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, it was. It really was. If we didn't have this book, we wouldn't have the Chic of Araby. I'm sorry?
Have you read 50 Shades of Grey?
You know,
Speaking of books that are not associated with
I have flipped through 50 Shades of Grey, and just I couldn't go there.
Yeah, I haven't read it either.
It was a little too disturbing. But
we'd love to hear from people who have read it and why you liked it.
I know a lot of people who have read it.
It's all about the relationships,
including my mother, and that's probably a large part of the reason that I can't read it. But,
okay, so this one, bestseller 1920 and 21.
Well, The Chic is interesting because it started a whole fad. The movie, but also a fashion. Where people would go and sort of.
There's so many things that are popping into my head that I could say, but I'm not going to.
Arabian styles became sort of a fashion, and men would actually go out and dress sort of chicy to go out at night. So it got pretty silly. But it's interesting a book to read because if you think of it as a romance novel, it isn't explicit at all, of course, because we're talking 1920, 21. But it is heavy duty. Romance, but it's those wildly overwritten kind of romances that you read. Florid, yeah. Where you read passages and you're just like, they had to be laughing at themselves when they wrote this.
I don't know. If they dressed up like Chics to go out for dinner, it sounds like they were taking themselves pretty seriously.
I think what's interesting is we realize that, in the period in which this was written, and it started a whole vogue for chic novels, where you had young women going to Egypt and being kidnapped by princes and all of this kind of stuff, and weirdly enough, when it comes to the sex scenes, which are done off stage, of course, but the seduction is very uncomfortable to read because they really are kind of quasi-rape scenes. I mean, they are, the Chic comes in and he says, you know, she's like, you know, free me, let me go, and he, you know, and he actually says at one point, he says, better me than my men.
She's being ravished.
Yeah, exactly, and of course that's the word that pops up every other sentence.
Oh, really? That's the vocabulary from the book itself?
That's it exactly.
So if you went back to the source to look at romance, did this lead you on to other romance novels? Did you
I have
continue
dallied.
to
I
delve?
will say that I've read more 1920 romance novels, 1920s romance novels, than I have contemporary ones.
Where do you even find them?
Well, you find them online. They're all over the internet now. Most of them you can download because most of them are public domain. You can download them
So these are free books?
For nothing. Yes, yes. And, you know, they are, I think we had talked before about formula and sort of the pleasures of formula. And you read 2 or 3 of these chic type books and you really begin to see what the formula is. As with most romance novels, what's interesting is the men seduce the women sexually, but it's the women who teach the men how to love. So
this is sounding a whole lot like what I hear 50 Shades of Grey is supposed to be.
Well, it is. It's the same exact formula. And what's fun...
So nearly 100 years later,
we're still
trying to teach y'all how to love.
Well,
and not steal.
Well, let us say it's time to reinvent the formula. Maybe that's the way to put it.
Or not, if it works.
Yeah, well, I think it works for...
Don't fix what isn't broken.
Certain readers. So, romance novels are kind of way outside my comfort zone. Now, nobody's ever given me one, which, you know, I guess that probably not surprising.
That could be taken a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So, what's another one that you were given that you were kind of iffy on? But I see the Elmore Leonard there now. That's not a book you'd normally be associated with?
Well, that was sort of a hard thing. I love Elmore Leonard.
Okay.
But then again, I kind of just picked the books that Jake would also read.
Okay.
Because the ones that Jake likes are typically not the ones that I like. So Elmore Leonard, because he delved into pulp fiction. He started off as westerns. Writing westerns.
Right.
There's one of my favorite stories about his doing some kind of boring day job, an insurance writer or underwriter or something. And he had this, remember in the desks, there used to be a little pull-out drawer on the top, a pull-out shelf.
Right.
So he would be writing on that pull-out shelf while he was looking at whatever he was supposed to be doing, and he'd kind of shove it closed when somebody would walk by. So he's just writing all the time. So he started off with the pulp westerns, and so now it's more of this sort of gangster fiction.
Yeah.
But then there are others. Cuba Libre is one all about Cuba that I really liked. But Get Shorty's fun. It just... there's nothing highbrow about it, but it doesn't make it not good writing. He's still such a tight writer.
Yeah. I read a lot of him, and it's weird because I find some books are really fun and just snap, crackle, and pop, and then there's some that just feel perfunctory. I mean, they just don't.
But don't you think when you're churning out a book or two a year, you're going to have hits or misses?
Well, and I agree, and I think what's interesting is in a weird way, and I might get kicked off the show for saying this, but I think...
Oh, not after everything else you said.
I think, you know, I've become a real fan of this show that was inspired by his books, by the Raylan Givens novels that he's done, a show called Justified. And that show is...
I didn't know that was.
Yeah, it's on television. But it's an amazing show because they do very... they do very clever things with narrative. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a fan of that show and has read a lot more Leonard than I have. And I said to him, I hate to sound, you know, like I'm, you know, breaking a commandment here, but the show is a lot more interesting than the source material. And he agreed with me, and I think part of that churning it out over and over again is an example of sometimes where you get locked into your formula, or you don't let yourself invent in ways that
or maybe your publisher doesn't let you invent,
that could be,
or your readers don't.
Yeah.
I think some of these books are kind of like going to McDonald's.
Okay.
The food isn't the best food ever, but we all know what a McDonald's cheeseburger will taste like.
When's the last time you ate at McDonald's?
Today.
Today? Really?
Yeah.
You gonna ask me the last time I ate at McDonald's? About 1991.
Yeah, I hit McDonald's probably about once a month,
Oh,
just
that's
to
wild.
get that fix.
So, if you are is there a genre then that you are a junk food junkie in?
Well, mysteries.
Mysteries, you can't get
Yeah,
enough of
I
those?
just read and read and read
Okay.
and read.
What? Let me ask you this: since you don't like girly books,
And I hate to even say it that way because it sounds pejorative, and I don't mean it to be.
well, we know what you're talking about, and I think that's fine.
Chick lit is a legitimate
tastes are
term.
tastes. Elmore Leonard books are usually pretty male, pretty masculine.
Yeah.
Do you ever read those and get disgusted with men or get turned off by the
No, because I think I already
maleness of
expect
it?
the behavior.
Okay.
It's like not a surprise.
All right. Is there a genre of male book that you totally wouldn't?
Western.
Really?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, because Jake will read those enormous Larry McMurtry books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't touch those with a 10-foot pole.
Really?
No.
Okay.
I did actually read one because he asked me to. This is part of what I thought the discussion would be today, was sort of how you come to books that people don't expect,
Sure.
and how you share books that others like but maybe you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Zeke and Ned. It's
Yep,
Larry McMurtry.
yeah.
I did read that because Jake read it and liked it. And I thought, okay, we will, it's kind of like trying a dish. So I read that and it was okay. But I don't know. Something out in the wild, wild west. That is too male for me.
Okay. Just doesn't appeal to you.
No, but you read Westerns, don't you?
I've read some. I read more of the literary ones. I don't like, I have never been a fan of the pulp Westerns like the Zane Greys or anything like that. I do like the Larry McMurtry ones, and I did enjoy, I was more of a fan of Horsemen Pass By, which they made into the Paul Newman movie HUD, and the Last Picture Show. I love the Last Picture Show.
I never read that.
Those are great sort of melancholy, the West has come and gone type novels. So those are a lot of fun. And
but don't you think Westerns, like romances, like mysteries in my case, speaking of Pinterest and the fact that we're on a Pinterest site, one of our little boards is called Book Bubbles.
Right.
So every time I see a quote about reading, we stick it there. And the one I saw recently, maybe because I gave up corn chips for Lent and I'm sort of obsessed, one of them said, you can't eat one chip just like you can't read one book.
Right.
And I wonder if for people who read a lot, and in fact romance readers are some of the most prolific readers out there. They just consume an amazing amount of content. They'll go through, typical romance readers, people who are really committed to that, will read 4 books a week, 6 books a week. So I wonder if it's kind of like a bag of Doritos.
Yeah.
There's just one more and one more and one more. And what you were saying about Elmore Leonard, where there's not a lot of meat to some of his stuff, well, maybe there's not an intent. Not that he's ever trying to write poorly, but maybe there isn't as much meat on some of them because you really are intended to just plow through one right after the other.
The genre that I think is becoming that is YA. And I say that because I know many women, my wife included, who once they got a Kindle, it was like it was nonstop on the YA, and I mean they're downloading. My wife.
Twilight started that.
Well, I think to a certain extent, but Twilight's pretty. Those are pretty long books. I mean, those are.
Well, the Harry Potter books are long.
Yeah, but the Twilight, those are pretty thick in the sense that you have a whole mythology there, and everything you have to learn, but. A lot of and I'm talking more the sci-fi YA, the post-apocalyptic type stuff.
This would be maybe the Hunger Games started that
exactly.
craze.
But I do think that those are books that people really love to gobble. I mean, they just, they tear through those, and it's.
Well, sometimes reading without thinking is an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
And not to, again, downplay any particular genre, whether it's chick lit or romance or westerns, or sometimes it's an escape and you don't want to have to think terribly hard.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily want to be challenged
Right.
psychologically or emotionally, particularly when people
I'll say this
die.
about a lot of Elmore Leonard's. There are a lot of his books where I will read along and just start laughing out loud.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
the wisecracks
great.
are really good in there.
He does great dialogue.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you know, probably no surprise, one of the ways that I come across books that I normally wouldn't read is I teach them, and I make myself teach them. So recently I did this book in a class. I'm doing a class right now in coming of age novels.
And look at you with all your little Post-it notes.
Yeah, exactly. I had never read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and I sort of assigned it specifically to make myself read it. And I was really struck by what a loss it was to me to have not read it at this point in my life. It's a great book, and I highly recommend it. Well, it's a coming-of-age novel, but it's also a coming-of-age in New York. Interestingly enough, in the area of New York now that is hipster central, in Williamsburg. But at that time, it was, you know, a poor area. And so it's coming of age in an impoverished family. And what's neat about it is you really root for the heroine. She's a very strong and sort of resilient young woman. And you know, it's kind of a mesh of a family chronicle and a coming of age novel. So you know, you get the very typical rites of passage that you get in coming of age novels, but then you get that whole family history. And you get the colorful aunts and uncles and everything. And
is there a culture to New York at that time that makes it endemic to that place?
Well, it's an immigrant culture. And so you're dealing with a lot of the Irish, the drinking songs. Her father is a singing waiter, and who, you know, who's waiting for in a sense, the manager to call him up and say, "This is your gig tonight, so go hit this restaurant and perform here." And so, yeah, I think it's the immigrant story that makes it really appealing. It's a interesting book in terms of the publication history of it, because you know, she had gotten out of that neighborhood and gone to college, and you know, had been a playwright, and was in her mid to late 40s, and the playwriting was drying up, so she cranked out this novel, and lo and behold, it's, you know,
this is what made her
a bazillion seller. But it was her one book that was ever really a big hit, and so, you know, she had to live with that. But I really recommend that. It's a great read, and that was one of those reads where, you know, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, and that's why I think it's good to step outside your comfort zone every once in a while. We got time for just one more of yours, and I see some Tim Dorsey books over there.
Tim Dorsey, who, by the way, is coming to the Alabama Book Festival,
exactly,
which will be the third Saturday in April.
April 20th.
April 20th. And he's a repeat offender. We've had him before, and he's quite popular and actually has some ties to Alabama.
Right.
But most of his books are set in Florida, and his most consistently recurring character is Serge, a serial killer.
Yeah.
It's absurdist, dark humor.
Yeah.
Not quite the same as the others that we talked about. Right. It's not really mob.
It's a little
humor.
more over the top than
it's
an Elmore Leonard.
It's completely over the top.
It's almost cartoony.
A little.
It's
kind of in the vein of Carl Hyacin, in that it's very Florida, right. And it's
zany serial killer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is another one of those where the crossover, trying to find things we have in common. And When Elves Attack came out at Christmas, and it's a fun way to get somebody introduced to Tim Dorsey.
Right.
And I suspect it'll come out in paperback this Christmas.
Yep.
It's a good gift book because it's just a really easy, funny read, and it's not terribly offensive. Where Elmore Leonard's language can get kind of salty, and Tim, once you get past the fact that you're reading and becoming sympathetic to a serial killer, it's just fun.
Yeah. Great, great. Well, believe it or not, we've run out of time again. So here we are, and we want to. This was a fun show. I enjoyed this a lot.
It was different.
I want to thank you again, and I want to thank our audience. And as we always do, we like to end just by saying, read a good book. Thank you very much.